Hey everybody, it's Wednesday.
It does not feel like a Wednesday
got
to me.
you,
Yeah, you got me. Yeah, you did straight up get me. I'm totally thrown off. And welcome to this week's edition of The Night Fight.
I'm Josh.
And I'm Emily, and I'm all thrown off because I feel like we were doing shows all kinds of random days with the expos that were going on, and then we had the expos that is all makes your week crazy. And now things are supposed to be slowing down, but it's not because it's the holiday season, and so that is fabulous. Everybody loves the holidays, but it is like a little bit crazy. So thanks for joining us. I guess that's the first thing. Josh is playing around with our background, so let us know where it looks best if you're watching that from home. But what we gotta say is it is ice season for a lot of people. I guess not everywhere, and I will not generalize that it's ice everywhere because you hear a lot of that online. And social media makes it seem like you are the only person at home that doesn't have ice, right? And I think a lot of times it pushes people, past their limits, or they try skinny ice, or they do things just because they know that other people are out there. Or I think there's a lot of people who maybe are new to ice fishing, right? This is all brand new to them, and so they don't realize all the ways to be safe, and so it's easy to feel like you're the only person that's not out there.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And there's a lot of people not out there fishing, even by us, being in north central Wisconsin. It still can be pretty sketchy. So just be patient. It'll come. We'll get it.
And so I guess that's a really great place to start, is when we talk about ice by us. We took after work on Friday and went to a few different little spots, and we drilled some holes, and we actually found a little bit more ice than we expected to find. And that was a really welcome scenario. That was really, really a great thing. But last weekend saw some fairly warm temperatures, and depending on where you were, varying amounts of rain. So Saturday morning, and we got up and we got all ready and we went outside right as we were packing up our vehicle, and we opened up our garage and noticed that it was raining. And so I found myself wearing ice bibs and a rain jacket. And I have to say that by the time we made it to the lake, it wasn't all that raining. It kind of had subsided where we were. But I was nervous about how the weather or how the ice would fare the weekend. And actually, it didn't do too bad.
Yeah, I think we started the weekend with something like 4.5 or 5 inches of ice, and by the end of Sunday, I'd say around noon, we were at about 4. So we lost like a significant amount, but enough that we were still safe. The edges were still good. I think the thing about this time of year that's saving everybody, at least the people that do have ice, is that the sun is at a low angle. So we're not getting like the beat down like we do in the springtime. It's kind of glancing off the top. So that's saving us a little bit. But yeah, we could sure use a little bit more of the 20s and 10s and negative 30s.
But as far as the actual fishing went, because the ice conditions are only the part of the trip, right? So the actual fishing, we found a lake where we know that there's a fairly deep spot not too far off the ramp itself. And we also know that there was a little bit of structure kind of around where we were, with some nice flats and all of that. And I don't know. We expected fish to be there. I don't know what we expected, to be honest. I don't expect ever my graph to light up like a Christmas tree, right? When that happens, that's so exciting. But it was really interesting because as we were jigging around, we did see fish coming in and out, and they were responding to our different jigging patterns. But the thing about it was that when the fish were going to come and bite, they flew in kind of out of nowhere. And so this wasn't like a game of jigging and then tricking them into this. This was if that fish was already being marked on your graph, there was already a better chance that you were going to get that bite. The funny thing is, and we can dissect this a little bit too, I would say even when Josh and I were on the ice together, we were finding the bite happening different for each of us. So I guess, well, maybe let's start there. So I guess one of the things that I noticed this weekend, what worked for me, I had a little gold tungsten, good gravy. What is it called? Disco ball. I wanted to call it mirror ball, but it was a gold disco ball from Widowmaker. And on it, I had a little red or a little pink, leggy bug on it. And honestly, we just make one of these plastics. So I should have brought an example, but it was just like a little leggy bug. And I found that what happened is when my Vexlar was empty and I could sit and I can jig, like honestly, like really pretty hard. And then when a fish would mark on my graph, I would have to like slow down and then stop. Normally, that's not the case. Normally, what brings a fish in is what you want to continue and what they will usually bite on. But in this case, I was finding that that was spooking them off, that they would come in and they would bail out. And when I would slow my jig down to a stop, those fish would ever slowly kind of move up to it. And then I was finding that my bite was this teeny tiny micro, like if you blink or if you breathe, if the wind blew the wrong way, you would miss this bite. And we have super, super sensitive gear that we're using here. And so that was just a really interesting thing to see, that you had to really kind of brace for that bite and use all of your gear together, the sensitivity of the rod with what the graph is telling you, with, what your hand is telling you. And so all of those things together, gosh, I cannot say that I caught that many fish, but the ones that we did catch were, honestly, you guys, we caught like 9s and 10s for bluegills this weekend. And we don't just say that because this game is not just about numbers, right? But it was really an astounding thing to find. So now that I've, I guess, talked about my entire jigging, how it all went, well, because you did something totally different.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was using a substantially smaller jig than you were. I was using a 3mm, which is a little bit of a pain in the butt for those of you that know what the 2.5 and 3mm jigs are like. And I had a pretty substantial plastic on there, but the whole thought process about it was that I wanted to continue to have some big jigging cadences in there, and so I did a lot of like lifting and letting it fall and lifting it and letting it fall. And I was using pretty much the same plastics you were, pinks and reds and oranges, just varying bodies. That's the thing about plastics, is that if you're not confident with them, it's going to be hard to be successful, because you try one and it doesn't work. Well, the thing about plastics is you try one and then you try a new one and then you try a new one and try a new one and try a new one. And even if you get a bite, once you get confident with it, you're like, well, maybe this one will be a better bite. Let's just tweak it a little bit. And sometimes it works. And then sometimes the fish look at it and then swim away and you're like, go back to the other one.
It's like when you go and you try to choose like movies, and like Netflix like knows what you've been watching for a while, and it's like, if you like this, try this. That's what you do with baits, if they like pig, try red.
so I mean, I was in some instances I was fishing with like a 2.5-inch profile, just trying to fish out some larger fish, and I was getting looks. I got a couple bites on it, but yeah, most of the bites came on like 1-inch plastics, and it ended up being just like a really nice bluegill bite. Like we didn't really have to. It was super lucky. Like we didn't have to really dig through a pile of small ones. It was just there happened to be in the spot, the little area that we were fishing. There was just a good group of them, and it wasn't fast and furious. But yeah, I would say overall my bites were a little bit more aggressive. But they came in like, as I would lift up and let it free fall. So it was like, slack line, it would hit very bottom and then stop, and then they go whap, because they'd be watching it that whole time. And so I don't know, maybe that was the difference. I don't sit and watch you when I'm fishing. I don't. So I don't know what you're doing. Anyways, it's been 10 minutes.
Oh my God. Okay, so this is ridiculous because we have a guest here tonight. And for those of you who are tuning in to see Ryan Salemi, we are just going to break the news to you right away that we are not live to, and we are not baiting and switching.
No.
But we have a totally different, awesome guest. And so before we bring him in, because we will introduce him. But here's, honestly, I will even almost read my text message to you, the parts that I can, right? Ryan got a hold of me at 6:29 p.m. So in true ice fisherman fashion, for a 7 p.m. show, he was leaving the ice at 6:29. And honestly, he said that as he was backing down the launch at the lake, his rear tire blew out. he says that he doesn't think that he'll be home for a while. He has someone coming for him, and so all of those things will be sorted out. And because we don't have to worry about like his safety and all of that, and he texted me a few times after, so he doesn't even seem all that irritated, which was awesome, right? But to be honest, we did decide to bring in a different awesome guest for you tonight. So at some point we'll have Ryan on, and I'm sure that we'll talk about that and all kinds of other things. But we have here tonight with us Matt, and he has been on ice as well. Been doing pretty good as well. And thanks for being here. That's first.
I came to see the show, see Ryan, because I just love him. He's a great guy. And
so actually, all just a little behind the scenes, I was gonna sit down and set up the show, and Matt just messaged me and said, "Start the show already." And I said, "Hey, do you want to be on the show?" And so he's like, "Oh, sure, I just started supper, but what the hell?" So thank you so much, Matt, for just like coming in and hanging out with us.
No
it's
problem.
It's gonna be fun anyway.
It's gonna be, yeah.
Hopefully, it's worth missing your dinner for.
It's good company.
Mediocre, at least. So, we obviously know you. And I imagine that there's a few people who know you here as well. But for people who maybe this is their first time meeting you, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
All right. My name's Matt Ress. I live in Monticello, Minnesota. Just moved here. I hailed from Wisconsin, lived in Grantsburg, up in the Chequamegon Bay area for a while, Rice Lake. And that was primarily the areas that I fished. Now I'm over in Monticello, and I'm working a few lakes over here, like Buffalo. I'll shoot up to Mille Lacs, just trying to learn some of the waters up here. Really great people. I've got to meet a lot of friends through the Clam Pro staff, and then just through the community and Facebook. So I'm learning a lot of stuff.
Yeah. And so where you're
that's kind of a quick breakdown.
Yeah. And then where you're at, do you guys have ice?
We do have ice. I still am driving about 30 minutes, northwest to get to it. And I'm running around on 3 to 4, depending on the rain days. I sat out in the rain just last week for 4 hours, 5 hours straight. I've been pushing it really hard to catch fish. Obviously, I staff for Clam Outdoors, and I kind of posted all over a little bit much, but anyways, I'm just proud to be part of that. Proud to be part of that organization. I get to see people like you guys at the show. I get to deal with the customers. I did retail support at the St. Paul show, and I was right next door to you guys. So that was fun. The whole journey and the whole process of it is just a beautiful, wonderful, frustrating, elegant thing. It really is. So I try to do it every day possible. Fish, I just love it. I eat it up. I'd love for nothing better than to just fish every day and post about it.
Yeah, actually, ditto.
Yeah.
And Ryan too. That's really funny. And it was actually really great to see you at the expos. And it was really nice to come home from the expos and have some ice. And so I guess as far as your ice season, your story is a little bit like a lot of other people's, where maybe people are doing some traveling to find ice that might be better than, at their home location.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. That's kind of a necessity. And then I had a local lake here that froze up pretty good, but then we had them consecutive days of 40-degree weather, and the ice, you've just got to watch it. I'm old enough and experienced enough that I hear the tiny cracking sounds of the ice. It's just small fracturing, but that's a sign, get off the ice. I had that happening to me, but the fish I found there weren't shallow. They weren't running weed edges or anything. They were 32 foot of water suspended up to 20 foot. And you guys know about barotrauma, but some people don't. When you're fishing very deep, you'll pull these fish up and their eyeballs will bulge out. Sometimes they won't go back down the hole. So you've basically killed that fish. So you kind of just have to keep them. And, I've chosen to stay off that type of lake just because I mean, I don't eat copious amounts of fish. Every once in a while, I'll bring 2 fish home and make a meal out of it. But I think you got to be responsible about that part too. Even though I like to post, I like to take care of my fish and the resource as well. So.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point that only gets brought up every once in a while, when and depending on where you are in the country, that depth can change, it can go up and down. I know around us that magic number is about 26, 27 feet. If you go, closer down by Lake Michigan, you'll get a couple more feet variance of where you can catch fish before they start getting injured. And it's really, there are ways that you can release them. They have different devices, you can make different devices, but overall it just is like, it's easier to just go and fish a little shallower, because eventually you're going to get some fish. Just depends on what it is.
Right. And it's kind of nice to start there first anyways.
Mm-hmm.
Then you don't have to be out as far on the lake.
Yeah.
Saves on walking distance.
Mm-hmm.
And towing your gear. But surely I'm joking. But in my opinion, if you need to clip fish, fizz fish, anything like that, and you're not keeping them to take home, don't fish for them.
Right.
It's pretty simple. I mean, barotrauma is not a misunderstood dynamic. People know when they have fish sitting belly up underneath the ice or in their hole that there's something wrong. So it's really important to preserve the resource for sure. Mm-hmm. And just be careful. If they do have eyes bulging or whatnot, that's a sign of barotrauma.
Yeah.
And those fish got to be kept, or you got to do something with them, and you can't just throw them back in the lake. So
I gotta fix this. Take this.
But I do really like hearing you talk about this. And for a few different reasons. Number one, we hear a lot on the internet these days about things like I think it was Jay was mentioning selective harvest, or you hear catch, picture, release, CPR. And I think, for a lot of people, and especially social media, it's like, oh, so common to hear that these days, but first of all, you have to have fish that are caught in a way that is possible to release that fish, right? And so if we're talking about, some of these jigs that have like 13 million treble hooks on it, and then like fish are going to like swallow that to their gut. I mean, that's hard to release that fish, so you hope to, be humane enough on that fish that you can release it. But I mean, this is something that still is worth talking about, because I think that especially when you talk about ice fishing, the accessibility is there. You don't need a boat. You don't need this. You don't need that. All you need is like a hole in the ice. And maybe some days that means even like jumping into somebody's old hole, right? And so the accessibility might be there. A lot of these like old guys, like I don't mean to generalize, but I think a lot of times that's the case, this old mentality of fishing that you keep every single one that comes out of the hole. I mean, that's everybody's choice, up to the limits, up to, whatever is designated by a DNR, right? But I think for a lot of people, what used to always be you kept everything has turned into these other options. But, it's great to release fish as long as they're in the condition to be released.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So, I mean, we're talking then about avoiding deep water. And when we're ice fishing, that's a lot of people's go-to. So if you are avoiding some of these really deep spots, how do you either find these fish that are suspended off, above the deep, or maybe that are shallow enough to be catching and releasing them?
All right. I've been fishing an area, and the biggest benefit of this area is it's got an inside bend, corner, whatever you want to call it. And other than that, it's basically just a quarter mile this way and a quarter mile that way. It's just basically a huge flat that slowly tapers, and it's sand and a little bit of rock rock and then that mossy like grass. There's not very good weed growth on it. There's not good rock humps. So I've been staying in the inside turn, the inside corner of that, and then drilling a myriad of holes. I mean, tons and tons of holes. I mean, I'm just killing my auger, but I'm hole hopping and I go in and then I go out. I go in and then out. So you can kind of form like a W to try to find that depth. And that's what I look for. Usually I'd look for weeds. We dropped the camera down there so I could actually see what the bottom contour looked like. And it was all just a huge sand flat with a few rocks and little mossy stuff in the bottom. And then, kind of that wavering bottom with those little divots in them like that. And then Jason met me out there the other day, and he has forward facing sonar. And I was like, okay, let's try this thing. I'm not an advocate for them, but they're a great tool to use and great resource. So I'm like, okay, let's run this. But I was only catching, or seeing, a fish or two there. The fish aren't schooled up in this area. I'm getting walleyes, I'm getting sunfish, I'm getting crappies. On a myriad of tactics, I'm using a jig. I'm using a drop jig by Clam. And then I've used a minnow. I've used a billy rub tail. I'm using the Mackie plastic wedges. It's been kind of crazy as to what I've caught the fish on, but basically I'm just out there hole hopping. But there's not big schools of them. Like I had a school the other day come through, and they were about 3 foot from the bottom of the ice, and I was roughly in about 9 foot of water, and they were cruising like 3 foot down, 4 foot down, and they were them big giant 15-inch crappies. And my jig was too small, kind of what you were talking about earlier about having a smaller jig, but you're catching more fish, but you have a propensity to lose some of the bigger ones because you just got to have them hooked right. Otherwise, you're going to lose them sometimes. But I was able to get one amazing fish up, and then stay into the walleyes and everything that's just passing through. This is just kind of like a funnel area. They don't sit, they don't school there. They just come in and then they're back out again. And I've shot out to the 10-foot depth and then back into 5-footish. And I keep doing this. And I just walk this huge circle and kind of cut through it just to try to locate fish with just a Vexilar, dropping it in the hole. If I see a mark, I fish it, catch that fish or move on. If it doesn't bite, I move on. I don't sit there for a half hour especially with bottom fish, because 9 times out of 10, they're perch. So I don't even waste my time. If they're not hitting, biting, eating it, move on. You can only work them so much. I've been using blade baits. Actually, yesterday was the first time I've even put live bait on all season. I have not used live bait at all. I haven't even used my ever-loving Billy Rub scent or attractants. I love it, but all I've been doing is just running around with a PT rattling spoon and just shaking fish up, or on a drop jig. I'm using an XL, all in 16th ounce. That's been the only constant. The other thing I do is I'm changing colors of the tail. I've got some right here.
Oh, I always love this part.
Right here. Here's the Mackie. This is the Jamie XL here. And then I've got the Poly XL. And any wedge bait will work, I think. But the key that I have found, and this has caught me a lot of the fish right here, is just a wedge style bait. And I've done really good with chartreuse, and I've done really good with orange, and I have it on a, a pink and chartreuse. Whoops, I got to find the camera. I always love
Yeah, it's
this
always
part.
backwards.
A pink and chartreuse tackle dry in 16th ounce, and then I'll use the XL or the double XL, and it's been catching me quite a few of the fish. I've been using also blade baits. The Pinhead Pro has been a fan favorite for the fish. They were smacking that really good when I first started out. The only difference was when I was fishing that 32-foot deep lake, I was using a red plastic, same jig, but I was using a red plastic and they were just smashing it. And if it's not broke, don't fix it. I kept using it. And like I said, though, I had to get out of there because the fish were just too deep. And plus the ice conditions got dangerous. But I think you could probably catch 90% of the fish that you want to chase with some kind of wedge style bait. They just undulate so well in the water, and they mimic and replicate so much of that underwater, zooplankton, photoplankton, and minnows and all that. I think if you just hit the color right on the tails, whether you use like a motor oil or a white, or try opposites. I like to try a white and maybe a black, or I'll go with a darker color like motor oil or something. And then if that doesn't work, I'll try a chartreuse, because you can see those in dingier water further away if you're a fish. And then I'll go to the orange as well, because that's kind of on that red spectrum. So I think that's a real neat little trick there. The red and the oranges, I think you can have a lot of luck with them. But other than that, I've totally gotten rid of basically all my other hundreds of colors. I just don't think it's necessary unless it's a minnow replication, like a darker back, and a kind of white silver chest. Just your simple basic looking minnow presentation. I think you can keep your colors down very simple. Black, white, orange, red, and chartreuse, and there you go. And I've been using one jig, and it's been pink and chartreuse. But if I went over to Wisconsin, that probably would not do as well in the tannic waters. I can't guarantee that, but I kind of favored a few different colored lures over there. I would fall for the blacks or the whites in that.
Yeah, and for anybody that's out there listening, and if you're not following Matt, he made a really good post yesterday, or I don't know if it was yesterday, but earlier this week, about when you take pictures of your fish, you're purposely putting your jig in the forefront with when you're holding your fish, so that people should take a close look at your pictures, because you almost always show what you're catching that exact fish on. And it is pretty helpful, and it is the colors that you're explaining. And when you say, like, yeah, those colors might not translate to, like you said, Wisconsin. I think Emily can attest to that. She tried chartreuse for a good portion of the day, one of the days last weekend.
Like
And they just don't on this particular lake. And this lake is notorious for being, like, very picky and, like, on or off. Like, there's some lakes where you're like, oh, it's not on, we're only catching a few fish. This lake is like, you're either catching a lot of fish or you're not catching any fish. And we put in, like, lots of hours into this lake, and it's a very crazy place to me. But the water is super dark.
What were your colors?
For me, it was pink and red. So I don't know if there was a distinction. Like, if you fished red, I feel like the fish were a little bit more cautious than the pink. But I wonder if that has to do with just how dark the water is. That pink may transition in the water, because your colors do change with water color.
Right.
So right. What it looks like up above the water might not is definitely not what it looks like, 10 or 15 feet down in especially some of these dark, very coffee colored lakes. So that's where you just have to kind of mess around, and when you're getting dialed in, when your tackle box starts to look like what Matt is describing, you really have your like handful of colors at work, and the rest of them, are pretty superfluous because you have your lakes that you fish on a regular basis, and then they just work. That's what the fish are eating in those bodies of water. So
I was able to, sorry to interject
No,
here.
go ahead.
I was able to fish Island Lake Chain over in Wisconsin there, Ladysmith Bruce area. And red was a really good color over there. And Island Lake Chain and McCann and all them aren't really super tannic, but they're a little bit darker, but red really worked over there. That was a good color over there too. So maybe it just has to do, with a little bit darker water. Over here, you drop the camera down and it was fuzzy hazy. It wasn't like we had the green algae bloom, but it was really fuzzy viewing the bottom. So there's some kind of an algae situation going on there that didn't give you a great field of view, but we could see far enough out that we can make out walleyes, whatnot. But so I guess the water was clear except for a small bit of algae and zoo and photoplankton in it. So that the colors might just be different from that, and maybe that's why pink was working for me and orange, but you can keep it pretty simple if we really try. And that's what I'm trying to do with clam this year is I'm trying to use their tackle and I'm trying to keep everything simple where I don't have this ginormous box. I mean, because we've got some great products. I mean, I could have 4,000 Widowmaker lures, moon jigs and Maynards and, Northland and all that stuff. But I'm trying to dial it in where I can use this color spectrum, like black, mix of black and white, change it up that way where I go to an extreme or I do a complement type of thing. Like I'll use a pink head with chartreuse under belly, and then I'll throw on a chartreuse tail. If I don't have a chartreuse tail on, then I'll throw an orange, and then sometimes white is just golden. I don't really deviate much from that. I don't get into the metallics and the golds and all that stuff. I just try to keep it, really, really simple. And I think it'll work, but I've still yet to prove it out. And I've got a few more lakes that I've got to really start wandering around on and, prove the hypothesis, so to speak. Show that it can work if you keep it simple, even though sometimes it is best to have gold and then have like a motor oil color or whatever. So sometimes you do need an arsenal of colors and jig profiles and stuff like this. But if a person can nail it down, it just makes life that much easier. And you can have 3 rods rigged up with XYZ. And if this does not work, try that. And, from there, it's like make it up as you go. You'll see what the fish will hit. And I'm trying not to do live bait. Not that I'm trying to decimate the bait industry or anything like that, but it's not convenient. If I have to dig, my favorite are Euro larvae. But every time I have to dig out Euro larvae and my hands are cold and, I'm like the crypt keeper and I'm trying to put these dang things on a hook and I can't see because I don't have my cheaters on. I mean, it makes things difficult. When I throw a plastic on, I'm like zoom, 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 different holes. And a fascinating thing I find, and I can't prove it through anecdotal evidence or anything, but when you use the plastics, I feel you're catching bigger, better quality fish. Honestly, I really do. Yes, I've got some real humdingers, on live bait and all. But I think if you run around with that plastics, you can fish more. I think you can fish more. You can fish it more effectively and efficiently, and then boom, 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 move on. And there are times where if you throw a mouse here or a spike or a waxy or something like that on there, that you'll get extra fish without a doubt. But to be efficient and cover a lot of water, especially when you do not have fish locked in schools of 30, 40 or whatever, that's one of the best ways I can think of to do it.
Well, and you're talking about, covering the water, and because it's not necessarily like the 1,000 baby bluegills that we're trying to target, right? It's, some of these larger fish. And so this kind of brings us almost full circle. I'm not ending things up yet. We're not that far into the show, but, kind of back to what you started with earlier. So hang tight on that, right? Because when a lot of people go out, they hit the lake and they're drilling holes, and you hear that old phrase or whatever, I don't know, it's not a phrase, but you hear, oh, you put your Vexilar in until you see fish, look for fish. And I think so often people expect to like put their Vexilar in and like see like a million little lines on their Vexilar, they told me to look for fish, here they are, like, I don't know, maybe some days, right? But I also, and maybe I'm wrong on this theory, but I think that, you're not going to get huge schools of bluegills, and the big ones are probably not going to be mixed in with the tiny ones either. And so although, go out, look for fish, find those big schools, especially with if you're with kids, catch a million of them and throw them all back or whatever. But, you're talking about covering water. And the reason for that is because you are targeting these bigger fish. And that's where I said it brings us a little bit full circle, because you were talking about, that little side pocket or whatever of your lake. And, maybe it's an area that's a pass through spot, right? But I think that's the key, especially to this time of year, when you have fish that are still active, because honestly, maybe this isn't the reason, but in my mind it is, like, the water is not as cold as it could be, right? I mean, it is winter, it is frozen over, right? But I feel like maybe the rain pushing under or whatever it is, some of these fish, at least in our experience, have been pretty active this year. And so when those fish are moving around like that, maybe you're hitting those spots where those minnows are coming through, and so when you're using plastics, maybe that's mimicking that specific bait. I don't know. This all feels very full circle to me. I just like all the things that you're saying.
Okay, one thing I didn't touch on that I probably should have too is that I'm fishing every hole. Now that's something I learned fishing over in the Park Falls area, Glidden. I fished a lake called Butternut, and it was very seldom that you would run around with a locator and stick your Vexilar in a hole and see fish. It just wasn't common. Now back in Grantsburg, I was always able to see schools of crappie, and I could fish between during the day and catch a ton of crappies because they just were schooled up and a little higher in the water column. But there they sat on the bottom, so I had to fish every hole, which slows you down tremendously if you can just fish for the red blob, and throw your spoon down or whatever, and boom, 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 let's hammer them. It's not always like that. I mean, it's kind of like Ryan, blessed laid plans go astray. I mean, he wanted to be here tonight, and he couldn't. And sometimes you just can't make stuff happen when you're out there. But you've got to learn to try to fish the water column. See if you can call in fish with maybe a rattling spoon or more active baits, and work the entire column, because you can't just assume because you didn't see red marks that there's no fish there. A lot of these fish that I'm catching are actually, I'm pounding the bottom and then bringing it up like a foot, and then I'll drop back down, and all of a sudden that creates or piques their interest. And next thing you know, I've got zoom in from the side. Now, when you're fishing 7 to 10 foot of water, that isn't a very big cone window. I mean, them fish can be sitting right outside the cone window right here, and you'll never know they're there until, they're there and it's Action Jackson time. Either they're going to hit or not. So that's another thing that I've been doing and having some success with, banging the bottom and then bringing it up. And then I'll come up when we had like 2 days of rain. I had crappies suspending right underneath the ice in 10 foot of water. I had them actually just coming through and then just sitting, hovering. It was the most movement I've seen in crappies, but at no determined level that I've seen in a long time. And I don't know if that's the fresh oxygenated water, or if it was blowing in some, mixing up the bottom, the sediment or whatever, or the minnows were active. But that's what seemed to work for me, and I just kind of ran with it, But they were all over the water column, and it was walleye, perch. I mean, it was crazy. It was really chaotic. I had a lot of fun, and
Yeah.
and obviously it's raining, so you don't have that full sun. And that's where full sun and fishing weed lines go hand in hand. When you can kind of get into the weeds more, especially those deeper weed beds and weed edges and stuff like that, they have more pockets to hide from the sun, basically, so predators can't see them or profile or whatever. So that's why I think those areas are a lot better and a lot hotter during that time of day, and they can move around a lot more on the weed edges or out of the weed edges and stuff when you have more of a cloudy type of day, and they can roam around a little bit more, do some exploring like Nemo
Yeah.
into the deep.
So for all of that kind of fishing that you're talking about, what kind of line are you using?
I'm using this year. I used Berkeley Trilene ice. I've used that for years and I had great success with it. But I've been running the Clam Frost this year. I'm running 3-pound tests. I'm running 4-pound test on my other rod. And then I'm with the spoons and stuff like that. I'm actually using an 8-pound fluorocarbon leader. And then I was running it to braid. But if I showed you a picture of the cooler days when I was out fishing, what the braid looked like, I mean, it was all little baby ice chunks all over the whole thing because it just does not shed water well. Now, I can't say that about the clam braid because I didn't try that, which is specifically made for ice fishing. But I would say 9 times out of 10, if you're going to be outside fishing and it's cooler temperatures, I would tend to stay away from braid myself because it just has more of a propensity to hold or retain water. I would use that on a inside shack situation or your spring fishing, early season fall fishing here, December fishing. But so there's that. And then I've got 7-pound on my other rod that I do some rattling with, and that's straight up mono, frost mono. And I'm just using clear everything. The nice thing about some of the clam lines is they're colored. So if you've got old eyes like me, you can see to put the line in through the eye of a hook. And that's why I don't use baby jigs either, because I can't see to tie them. If I get bit off, I'm done. That's it. I got to go home and get my magnifying glass with the spotlight on it so I can see to hook my jigs. That's why I actually pre-hook everything.
Well, and I'm a big fan of high vis line all season long. It's just one of those things as a pan fisherman. You watch a lot of line jump. You know that sometimes you don't feel or even see your rod move, and you just tell from the line. And after you do it for a while and you are used to what gear you're using, because I know some people are like hardcore schooly guys and they only watch line jump, and they can probably relate to this no more. But I got used to the stuff that I'm using, and I still, like I said, I'm using some fairly large plastics with very light tackle on it, and when it's falling, sometimes, like you said, that cone angle is so narrow and that jig is falling right here and the fish could be just outside of the cone angle, and then they just pop in, grab it, and it's still falling, you know, and that's why I do those big sweeping jigs, because it's non-threatening, because it's such a small, slow, you know, a small relative, you know, 2.5 inch plastic is pretty big in the winter, but when it's moving so slow and then it's just floating down, you know, that's pretty non-threatening. And so, you know, a lot of times you'll get stuff to hit that. So just being able to see line is nice. I don't know. I think we run pretty much just 3 pound on almost everything. I think we have 6 pound on the walleye rods. For a while now, I've been taking the X plasma from Sunline off of my summer rods and putting it on backwards onto my winter gear. Just because then the new line's on the opposite side.
Right.
And so I get a few seasons swapping it back and forth like that. And it's kind of like it's an extruded line. So it acts like a braid, but it's not braided. So it still freezes up a little bit. It's not nearly as much as, like you said, a traditional braided line. But if, you know, for anybody out there, you know, fighting that good fight with the braided line, I always just keep like a tube of chapstick in my bibs, and you can run that on your jig, you know, your jig length. You know what, everybody knows what I'm talking about. It's that like foot of line that goes in and out of the water, and then it forms that big ice ball. If you put some chapstick on it, that really helps reduce it. And then when it does start to build up, it's easier just to slide off. And if you just push it down, it'll melt when it hits the water, because the water's not freezing cold. So I don't know. That's my line stuff.
I think it's really important to watch your line. Those long liners are the best. And a lot of the guys that are successful in the tournament circuits are doing long line techniques and stuff. It's a unique art too. But to watch your line is not that difficult, actually. I mean, with clear line, it is a little bit tougher. But if you watch that rod tip, that's another thing. Speaking of rod tips, if you've got your locator sitting right here, you can keep your rod tip right by the face of your electronics and sit here and hum it, you know, hover it, whatever you want to do, but always keep it close to the face. That way you're never taking your eyes off of the fish movement on the cone. That's a great thing to do with any of your electronics. You can see the fish if it's coming up or down, and then, you know, your rod tip is still there. So you're absorbing and being efficient. You're seeing everything right there. And then you're not overextended. I see these videos where these people are like, there's their arm, set the hook. I was like, I can't set the hook. I just hit the roof of my shack, you know, and it's a 7-foot shack. So that's probably not the best, but I joke about that. But the other thing is that if you keep your arm down, you get a better hook set and you have more control of your rod. And rod control, I think, is really paramount. I think it's really important because the rod is what plays the fish. You get the violent head shakes on there, especially from walleyes. They're head shaker, thrasher, and then big crappies do that too. Now, if your rod is doing that and absorbing that, you're running your 3-pound test line. It's helping absorb that shock, and then it's also keeping a load on that rod so that the fish can't throw that lure out. And I think that's really important too. So you keep it down, but you don't keep the rod pointed at the hole like this, because what are you doing if you have your rod pointed straight down? All that's fighting the fish is your line, and your drag's going zing, zing, zing. I mean, you're not exhausting the fish at all, and then you're not putting any weight. So if they do bounce the bottom of the hole or something like that, you have no tension on them. You know, you don't have any room for human error. That's the importance of a good rod load. So I just thought I'd throw some of that stuff out there too, because it can really help a lot of anglers land more fish instead of, you know, just fighting them with your line. Use your rod to fight the fish.
Mm-hmm.
And then if
That's why
you're
you have
dipping your rod tip in the hole all the time because the fish is taking line or whatever, just, wow, just turn the little tension knob on the spool and let them take some line out. And then another thing that'll help you tremendously is, and say you're getting these 12 to 13-inch crappies, the real nice ones and stuff that are really fighting. Don't sit there and wind against the drag, because you're going to twist the living heck out of your line. And then you're going to have a nightmare and be like, oh, this line sucks. And it's like, no, it's not the line. It's just the way the progression went, that you twisted the line and caused this problem. And it's just a learned thing. Reduce your drag just a little bit. Use a rod that loads up. I know the JTs are wonderful for doing that. I'm using the Katanas and the straight drop. There's some other like the tickle sticks and stuff like that. They'll help keep the load on it on the fish too. I think it's really super important to let a rod fight the fish.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of fighting the fish, one of the things that you have to do is make sure that they are there. And I think this is going to bring us down into maybe our last question. Jeff is asking, what's your take on shadows from moving around? Does it spook fish?
I don't. Here's my thing. I've been fishing shallow for a while. Take cleats off, leave them on. Safety versus, spooking the fish. I'm an advocate of just fish. Cover water, fish. If these fish are spooky, hesitant, go for other ones. Try to go find the active fish. That's what I'm all about. I try to be as quiet as possible. I'll take my cleats off, but after I biffed the other day, I'm not doing that as much, because when you're 56, you could break a hip, literally. So, but
and I think that's a good point too, is that just take a look out there on your shelves and just realize that there's a lot of options nowadays in different types of cleats. For anybody that's looking for a good recommendation for, the shallow water, early ice, like cleats that we like to fish for panfish, we've really come to like the diamond grips from Yak Track. They're not very aggressive. They're round, so they're not like spiky, but they have enough grip on them, and they're super quiet. Like, they're not very much louder.
Not super quiet, but they're pretty good.
They're not much louder than walking around in a boot, honestly, unless you're, able to slide around.
Right.
As far as shadows, I think, I don't think it makes that much of a difference. Like you said, if the fish are active, if they're not active, I don't know. I mean, then like you said, it's not worth wasting your time. But I will say, in the springtime, it's good to notice your larger snow piles versus your bare ice, because a lot of times the fish use those as cover. And so drilling holes like 1 or 2 around the snow piles, or just fishing on top of snow piles and then putting your holes out around the ice, that can help you later in the season when that starts to happen. So just, keep that in the bank for later. I think this time of year, though, you just have to find whatever fish are biting.
Right. I there's not much you can do. Red Lake is a great example. Fishing below cracks or discolored ice, because I think they use it as a hiding area, a harborage area. Someplace that they can kind of hide and still ambush prey and stuff like that. You see it a lot when these people are out fishing, that these guys over here on this snowdrift little area are catching more walleyes than these guys fishing out in this beautiful, nice, great ice. It's really hard to get away from that early season thing. If you can work your body with the sun angles, which is sometimes hard because it just depends on the positioning of the lake. If you can watch your shadow, don't project it to the fish, obviously, but you can kind of try to keep that away, so you come at the fish from this angle, or you come at them from the other angle. You can be conscious and cognizant of stuff like that. But I mean, that the walking around on the ice, I mean, you just really can't help but make noise. So you try to do the best you can. You try to get up there, you be as quiet as you can. And sometimes you have to fish a hole out. And by that, you sit there for 5 minutes, you sit there for 10 minutes and just wait. If they're really working in the area, if they're around, they'll flood back in. They will come back around and run their little travel routes and whatnot. It can be time consuming, but there could be benefits and payoffs for that. A little bit of time waiting. But if you don't have a lot of time, I go after the aggressive fish. I think that's the best plan of action. You go find the fish, don't wait for them to come to you. That's the biggest problem with people and portables or hubs is the flip overs, is that as soon as they flip it over or put a hub up, that's it. They ain't freaking moving. I mean, they drop a minnow down and that's it, man. All right, another beer, whatever. Not that they're not good fishermen, or anglers. The thing is that you're waiting for the fish to come to you. And if they don't run that line the whole night, I mean, you aren't catching. And I absolutely hate fishing. I really do. I mean, I don't drink beer or anything like that. I get bored. I'm like, let's go home. This is a waste of time. I like catching. So I've been out hunting them a little bit more, within reason, because I've got a blown ankle. So I got bone shrapnel in there and I can't walk and pull gear 2 miles and do all that fun, good stuff. But I can cover enough holes and enough area that if I'm in a fishy area, I should be able to find something, within reason,
Yeah. Oh, goodness. I feel like we could keep talking about all of this and asking questions for, gosh, at least 1, if not 2 more hours. But unfortunately, this is how time goes. And so, gosh, Matt, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for being here and joining in with us, even kind of spur of the moment.
Well, I'm not Ryan, but
no, there was a lot of good information, and I'm probably going to have to go back and at least listen to a little bit more myself just to gather all of it, because that was a lot of good stuff.
Yeah.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it.
Yeah. And to the people at home, thank you guys for being here as well, because the questions and comments and things along the way, that is always a big part of the fun. And to, I guess, everybody at home, join us on next week's edition of The Night Bite.
Night, everybody.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.